They say every neighborhood has that one neighbor, the one who turns the simplest things into a battlefield. For me, it all started with something so small, so ordinary, you'd think no one could possibly care. My trash can. But when an HOA Karen decided it was her mission to teach me a lesson, she didn't just knock it over once. She made it a daily spectacle, a power play to remind me who she thought was in control. What she didn't know was that every push, every petty act, was pushing me closer to a plan she would never see coming. So what happens when the bully finally gets blindsided? When I first moved into this neighborhood, I thought I had finally found peace. The street was quiet, the lawns were neatly trimmed, and the kind of picture-perfect community you'd see in a real estate brochure. Families waved at each other. Kids rode their bikes in the afternoons, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could just breathe. My home wasn't anything extravagant, just a modest house with a small front yard, a sturdy fence, and a driveway big enough for my car and the weekly trash bins. Simple, ordinary, and exactly what I wanted. Life had a comfortable rhythm. I worked during the day, came home to a warm meal, and spent evenings either tending to my little garden or chatting with the neighbors who seemed friendly enough. At first, I thought I had landed in a community that actually cared about each other. The HOA, I assumed, was just there to keep the place clean, organized, and safe. That's what their glossy welcome packet promised. A shared commitment to harmony. But beneath that promise, I began to notice something else. There were whispers at community meetings, little reminders taped to mailboxes, and a certain tension whenever the rules were mentioned. People laughed about it nervously, saying things like, "Oh, that's just how the HOA operates," as if we were all expected to just accept it. I didn't pay much attention at first. I was new, and I wanted to fit in. Besides, I had nothing to hide. My yard was clean, my home was well kept, and I followed the basic guidelines. Why would anyone have a problem with me? Then came the first sign. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it stuck in my mind. One morning, as I left for work, I noticed my trash can had been moved. Not just tipped over by the wind, but dragged out of place, lying on its side halfway down the driveway. I thought maybe kids had been playing nearby, or maybe it was just bad luck. I set it upright and forgot about it. But it happened again, and again, each time more deliberate, each time more humiliating because the neighbors noticed, and I could feel the stares as if people were silently judging me for being careless. That's when I learned about her. Every neighborhood has one. The self-appointed watchdog. Ours was a woman who lived just a few houses down, a long-time resident with the kind of influence that made everyone tread carefully. People called her a stickler for rules. But the truth was, she thrived on control. She wasn't just enforcing the HOA's guidelines, she was rewriting them in her head and punishing anyone who didn't live up to her personal standard. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. But deep down, something felt off. Why target me? Why make something as trivial as a trash can into a public spectacle? I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. What started as a nuisance was about to spiral into a battle that would test every ounce of my patience, and ultimately lead me to do something she never could have predicted. At first, I convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe the trash can incidents were just a weird coincidence. Maybe the wind really was stronger than I thought. Or maybe kids were playing pranks. But the problem was, it didn't stop there. A week later, I came home to a bright orange slip of paper stuck to my front door. At first, I thought it was some kind of flyer. But no. When I looked closer, I realized it was a warning notice from the HOA. According to them, I had violated a community standard by leaving my trash bin visible from the street for too long after pickup day. It would have been funny if it weren't so absurd. The bins had been out for maybe an extra hour, nothing more. But the wording on the notice was sharp, almost threatening. Failure to comply may result in fines or further disciplinary action. I Remember standing on my porch, reading it over and over, a sinking feeling growing in my stomach. This wasn't just about trash cans anymore. This was a target. The next morning, I saw her, the neighbor, Karen. Arms folded, lips pressed into a smug little smile as she walked past my driveway. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence said it all. She was behind this. And she didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, the orange notices piled up. One for improper lawn maintenance, even though my grass was trimmed. Another for a decorative item that supposedly violated uniformity standards. That item? A small potted plant by my doorstep. Each notice carried the same threat. Fix this immediately, or face escalating fines. I watched as my once peaceful home became a battlefield of paperwork and paranoia. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I scanned for a new slip taped to my door. Every time I left my trash bin out for even a minute, I wondered if she was watching, taking notes, waiting for her chance to pounce. And I wasn't imagining it, because sometimes I caught her. I'd look up from my yard work and see her peering out her window, phone in hand. Other times, I'd step outside late at night only to find her car creeping slowly past my house, headlights off. It felt less like a neighborhood and more like a surveillance zone. Then came the first fine. I opened the letter one Friday evening to see the HOA had decided I now owed $100 for failure to correct repeated trash violations. The words blurred on the page as my anger boiled over. I had corrected everything, every petty, ridiculous demand they made, but it didn't matter. They weren't enforcing rules. They were enforcing her. Stormed into the next HOA meeting, letter in hand. I told them straight out this was harassment, that I had followed their guidelines, that these so-called violations were bogus. And do you know what happened? They stared at me, stone-faced, unmoved. And then, almost in unison, they sided with her. The president of the HOA said, "We take all reports seriously. If you feel singled out, you may file a formal appeal. But until then, fines are due. Formal appeal. In other words, drown me in bureaucracy until I gave up." As I left the meeting, I caught Karen's eyes across the room. She gave me that same smug smile, the smile of someone who knew the system was hers to control. After that night, the harassment escalated. My mailbox mysteriously stopped receiving HOA newsletters, yet she always seemed to know the latest updates. A notice accused me of parking too close to the curb, though half the street did the same. Another cited unapproved modifications to my property, modifications that didn't even exist. It wasn't just rules anymore. It was a campaign. And I started to notice something disturbing. The other neighbors avoided me. People who once waved from across the street now kept their distance. Conversations went quiet when I walked by. It was as if Karen's narrative that I was a troublemaker, a rule breaker, a problem was spreading. She wasn't just targeting me, she was isolating me. The final straw came one Saturday morning. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee, only to find my trash can knocked over again, garbage spilled across the driveway, papers fluttering down the street. But this time, taped to the lid, was a brand new notice. Final warning: non-compliance. Will result in legal action. I stood there frozen, coffee cooling in my hand, rage burning through my chest. Legal action. Over a trash can, over rules she invented, over her obsession with control. And then I noticed something else, a small red light blinking from across the street, Karen's porch camera. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. She was filming me, watching, waiting for a reaction. That was the moment everything shifted. Up until then, I had tried to play by the rules, tried to reason, tried to fight fair. But standing there with garbage scattered across my lawn and another threat taped to my property, I realized reason didn't matter. She wasn't after compliance, she was after control, and I had a choice: keep being her victim or fight back on my own terms. So I started documenting everything. Every notice, every photo of my yard in compliance, every time-stamped picture of my trash bin neatly placed on the curb. I built a file thick enough to choke the very system she used against me, but I wasn't stopping at paperwork. No, I had something else in mind. Something that would turn her obsession into her downfall. Because if Karen wanted to play a game of control, I was about to show her what losing felt like. What happened next would push this petty battle into territory no one on the street saw coming. Not the HOA, not the neighbors, and definitely not Karen herself. Because while she thought she was teaching me a lesson about rules, I was about to teach her a lesson about consequences. The breaking point wasn't a single notice. It wasn't the fines, the whispers, or even the garbage spilling across my driveway. It was the moment I realized she wasn't just harassing me. She was trying to erase me. The final warning letter from the HOA didn't just threaten legal action. It included something far more sinister, a demand that I attend a mandatory compliance hearing. According to the letter, failure to attend could result in liens against my home. My home. The place I had worked years to afford. The only safe space I had left. For the first time, I felt real fear. Fear that one petty controlling neighbor could manipulate the system to strip me of everything I owned. But fear quickly hardened into something stronger. Determination. I spent the next week turning my house into an evidence bunker. Every photo I'd taken of my yard, every time-stamped image of my trash bin, every ridiculous notice stacked neatly into a binder. I even printed screenshots of text messages I'd exchanged with other neighbors, ones where they admitted they'd been targeted by Karen before, but had been too afraid to fight back. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone she had silenced, everyone who had rolled their eyes but bitten their tongues because they didn't want to be next. By the time the night of the hearing arrived, I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into an ambush. My ambush. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige walls and a long folding table where the HOA board sat like a panel of judges. At the center sat Karen, lips curled into that smug smile she wore like armor. The room was packed with neighbors. Some came out of curiosity, others out of fear, but most came because they wanted to see what would happen when the HOA finally put me in my place. The president opened the meeting with a flat voice. We are here today to address repeated violations by the homeowner at 142 Maple Drive. The board has received multiple complaints regarding trash receptacle misuse, yard maintenance, and failure. To adhere to community standards, this hearing will determine the necessary disciplinary action. Karen leaned back in her chair, arms folded, eyes locked on me like she had already won. But then, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, calm on the outside but fueled by months of pent-up frustration. I laid my binder on the table, flipped it open, and began. Every accusation you've made against me is not only false but malicious, I said, my voice steady, and I have proof. Page by page, I presented my evidence. Photographs of my trash bin placed neatly at the curb within HOA hours. Close-ups of my yard, trimmed and spotless. Copies of the very notices they had sent me, each one more baseless than the last. Murmurs rippled through the room. Neighbors leaned forward. Some began whispering. But I wasn't done. I pulled out my final weapon, a USB drive. I had installed my own security camera weeks earlier, hidden behind the hedges. And it had captured everything. With the board's projector connected, I pressed play. The footage filled the wall. Karen, in broad daylight, striding up my driveway. Karen grabbing my trash bin, yanking it onto its side, scattering debris like a vandal. Karen pulling out her phone, snapping photos as evidence of my supposed violations. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, even laughter. Her smug smile cracked, then vanished. She stammered something about misunderstanding, but the damage was done. Everyone saw the truth. The HOA president slammed his gavel, but it was too late to control the chaos. One neighbor stood up, voice trembling with anger. "She did the same thing to me last year. She ruined my garden and blamed me for it." Another chimed in. "She fined us over Christmas lights, while her own decorations stayed up for months." The accusations poured out like a dam breaking. One by one, neighbors who had been silent finally spoke, emboldened by the proof on the screen. Years of petty harassment, manipulation, and control. All laid bare in the open. And then, the true bombshell, I revealed the formal complaint I had filed with the city council. In my binder, I had included copies of municipal statutes, showing that many of the rules Karen had enforced weren't even legally binding. The HOA had been operating on her word alone. Silence fell over the room. For the first time, Karen looked small, her face flushed red, her hands trembling as she tried to gather her papers. She wasn't the enforcer anymore. She was the exposed bully, caught in her own web. The HOA president cleared his throat, sweat visible on his brow. "Given the evidence presented tonight, we will be suspending all pending actions against this homeowner. Furthermore," he glanced at Karen, then back at the crowd, "we will be reviewing the conduct of certain board members to ensure fairness moving forward." But the neighbors weren't satisfied. The room buzzed with calls for her resignation, for accountability, for change. Karen tried to protest, but every word was drowned out by the rising tide of voices against her. And in that moment, for the first time since moving into the neighborhood, I felt something powerful. Vindication. She hadn't just lost control of me. She had lost control of everyone. Karen fled the room before the meeting ended, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast. The same woman who once strutted through the neighborhood with pride now slipped away under the weight of her own humiliation. The board adjourned in chaos. Neighbors gathered around me, some apologizing for staying silent so long, others thanking me for standing up. The divide she had created began to crumble in real time. But as I left the clubhouse, binder under my arm, I couldn't shake one thought. This wasn't the end. People like her don't surrender easily, and as much as I had won tonight, I knew she'd be waiting, plotting her next move, desperate to claw back the control she had lost. That night, I walked back into my house, exhausted but relieved. For the first time in months, I believed I had finally beaten her. But when I looked out my window, I saw it. Her porch light flicking on, her shadow moving behind the curtains. Watching, waiting. Because if this battle had taught me anything, it was that Karen wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And the real war was only beginning. The night of the hearing felt like a victory. For the first time, Karen had been stripped of her power, exposed in front of everyone she once intimidated. Neighbors who had whispered behind closed doors were suddenly bold, voices raised, stories spilling into the open. And for the first time since moving into the neighborhood, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I belonged. But here's the thing about people like her. Humiliation doesn't end them. It fuels them. In the days following the hearing, the neighborhood seemed to shift. I received more waves from across the street than I ever had before. One neighbor brought me cookies and said, "You did what we all wanted to do." Another stopped me while I was mowing the lawn and quietly admitted, "She had us all scared. Not anymore." It was a strange transformation, where once I felt isolated, I now felt supported. The community that Karen had divided was slowly stitching itself back together. But I could still feel her presence, watching from behind her blinds, her porch camera still blinking in the dark. The difference now was that the power had shifted. Her silence wasn't smug anymore. It was seething. And then, 2 weeks later, I received another letter. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the city council itself. Apparently, after my complaint and the footage I had submitted, the council had launched a formal review into our HOA's practices. They weren't just looking at Karen, they were looking at the entire board. The investigation revealed something shocking. The HOA had been illegally enforcing rules that didn't align with municipal codes. Worse, they had selectively applied those rules, often targeting specific homeowners while turning a blind eye to others. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. Her complaints had driven most of the enforcement. But now, with the city stepping in, the very system she had manipulated for years was collapsing. The board was forced to suspend multiple policies. Fines issued under those policies were declared invalid. And Karen, who once strutted into meetings like she owned the room, was quietly removed from her position of influence. It was poetic. The very rules she had twisted to control others became the weapon that destroyed her power. Months later, I found myself once again sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet I had once taken for granted. Kids rode bikes down the street, laughter echoing, neighbors waved as they passed, and then I saw her, Karen, shuffling down her driveway, her shoulders slumped, her eyes avoiding mine. She no longer carried that smug smile, no longer barked orders or wrote notices. She was just another neighbor. In that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just my victory. It was the neighborhood's victory. And it was proof that no matter how relentless the bully, no matter how overwhelming the system, there is always a way to fight back. Because sometimes the smallest act of defiance, the refusal to bow down, the courage to stand up, can change everything. And in the end, that's exactly what happened here. So, the next time you hear about a petty HOA rule or a neighbor who seems obsessed with control, ask yourself this: is it really about the rule, or is it about the power? Because as I learned, the moment you take that power back, everything changes.